While most speedrunners show appreciation towards a game by completing it in the fastest time possible, this isn't the only way to form a competitive scene in a game. In the Spelunky competitive community, we've made a distinction. There are speedruns, in which the objective is to complete the game as fast as possible, and then there are score runs, in which the time taken to complete the game doesn't matter. Instead, ranking is determined on how much money a player ends the game with. As you can imagine, competitive score runs can accumulate some mind-boggling scores. This is the ending scene of a world record score run by Kinnijup in the middle of 2018. A whopping score of 3.5 million. Now this is the ending scene of a score run world record by the same person in the middle of 2019. $7.4 million. The 2018 run was completed on April 2nd, 2018. The 2019 run was completed on April 15th, 2019, only a bit more than 1 year later. And both were completed by Kinnijup. So how did Kinnijup more than double the world record score in a year? Welcome to the Spelunker's Guide, where we break down bugs and glitches in the indie masterpiece Spelunky. And I'm Contramuffin. Let's get started. To understand what happened between 2018 and 2019, we'll need to first talk about vaults. This is a vault. Pretty standard, right? Destroying it and robbing its contents will give 12 to 16 gems. If you ghost all the gems, then at $5,000 per diamond, you can get around $60,000 to $80,000. Now, let's see what happens when DT collects this vault. He starts with $404,000. And comes out with $569,200. He got $165,200 from this vault. Even factoring in the 2 extra diamonds that weren't from this vault, this discrepancy between the expected value and the actual value of the vault can't be explained by just random gold nuggets. In fact, this isn't a recent discovery. Spelunky score runners have known about this for a long time, so for many years, score runners would try to place gems and gold together into a small pile and then collect the money all at once. For years, the community called this a dupe, which is short for duplication. However, as score runners quickly learned, the dupe was inconsistent and it failed more often than not. And despite glitch hunters' best efforts, the community was unable to make it consistent. And so this glitch remained like this for several years. It wasn't until the middle of 2018 when the case of the infamous dupe was reopened. This wasn't a coincidence. It so happened that just a few months before, there was an influx of newer players into the community. These new players were able to offer a new perspective on how to crack this mystery, and as soon as they were notified of this cold case on September 14th, 2018, they got to work. The first discoveries were basic, GruntingCrunchy discovered that the dupe appeared to be dependent on location. Spef found that a rope would cancel any dupe from occurring in the level. I found that as long as everything remained controlled, the dupe was in fact consistent, proving that there wasn't a random element to the dupe. Based on these discoveries, samcv, Dan, and I determined that the dupe was being controlled by some element which we coined precedence, and that as long as a player followed the order of precedence by picking up the money in the right order, that player would be able to achieve a dupe every single time. And with this discovery, the dupe deserved a new name. It was coined render dupe because we believed that precedence was based on the rendering order of items in the level. And within 24 hours, we were able to replicate the render dupe consistently. But something was off. Even when we mapped out the exact order of precedence, sometimes we got no dupe. And why was it that ropes could cancel a dupe anyways? To help solve this mystery, we introduced a new concept, which we called noise. The idea was that there must be something that was interfering with the dupe, as if it were introducing noise in our measurements. And so the race was on again to describe what is noise. Spef and I quickly isolated the source of the noise. It was other items. As it turns out, the presence of other items will hurt a dupe. And ropes cancel dupes because each tile of rope acted as one item, so one rope, which extends 7 tiles, counted as 7 items worth of noise. But there was something missing. Some items, like rocks, didn't hurt dupes, while other items, like pots, only hurt dupes some of the time, while yet other items, like jetpacks, always hurt dupes. To help us classify this phenomenon, we called the items which always hurt dupes as universal noise. And by analogy, the items which only sometimes hurt dupes became local noise. It was at this time that precedence took on a new, bigger meaning. Early on, I noticed that precedence, the order that you needed to follow to get a perfect dupe, seemed to always follow the depth of items. Which is to say, if a ruby is in front of a sapphire, then you needed to pick up the sapphire before the ruby in order to get a perfect dupe. The sapphire took precedence over the ruby. And as it turns out, universal noise items were always behind gems and gold, and local noise items were only sometimes behind gems and gold. If we extrapolate a bit, then we can come to the conclusion that these noise items were hurting a dupe because they were taking precedence over the gems and gold. So we actually needed to pick up those items first or destroy them in order to follow the order of precedence and get a perfect dupe. So the instructions seem simple enough to follow, right? Either pick up or destroy noise items, then follow the precedence in order to get a perfect dupe every single time. Well, not quite. It was true that these steps worked for the vast majority of cases. But as score runners tested out this meta for the first time, we came across a new issue: mummies. We quickly realized that when items are spawned, they are assigned a precedence. We began to call this process as an insertion. And each mummy that is killed will spawn 2 rubies and 8 mummy wrappings. Mummy wrappings are considered local noise, so that means that depending on how they insert, or in other words, which precedence they get assigned to when they spawn, the mummy wrappings could either hurt a dupe or they don't. Well, that's not a big issue. Just destroy them all, right? Well, there's just one issue with that. it doesn't break. In fact, out of all the testing that we've done, we have only managed to find one way of destroying mummy wrappings, and it involves dunking them in lava, then dropping a push block on them. This, of course, is too inconsistent for a score run. And we can't just ignore the mummies because the City of Gold, the level with the most money, always has at least 4 mummies guarding the Book of the Dead. So what now? Is score running really just doomed to revolve around RNG? Do we really just have to hope that the mummy wrappings insert into a good precedence? The community was in a bind. I tested to see if we could cause the mummy wrappings to always insert into a precedence that won't hurt dupes, but this was tough. How do items pick their precedence anyways? And mummy wrappings were strangely inconsistent. Sometimes they were more precedent than golden gems, and sometimes they weren't. And when other scientists tried what I tried, they got different results. What was going on? In the last days of September 2018, nearly 2 weeks after the community hit this roadblock, I finally figured out what was going on. I realized that something strange can happen. Normally, when you fire a shotgun, the bullets pass in front of any other object. But if you fire enough times, the bullets start appearing behind that object. That was an incredibly odd observation, because we had thought that all newly spawned items had to insert at the lowest precedence or in front of all other objects. And yet, if the bullets are passing behind objects, then those bullets must be more precedent than those objects, right? And indeed, upon further testing, we discovered that's exactly the case. Here, you can see one of my confirmation tests, where I try to spawn pots until I hopefully cause the pots to spawn behind the others. And at this moment, you can see the pots start spawning behind the other pots. We began calling this phenomenon as an insertion switch, because something was going on that was causing items to suddenly switch to inserting at high precedences instead of at low precedences. And I even manually counted how many pots it took to cause an insertion switch. It was exactly 1,000 pots. We concluded this. The list which contained all the items in a level, or the item list, is broken up not only into how much noise an item causes, but further into 1,000 slots, with each group of noise items having 1,000 slots of their own. And there was some theoretical number, which we called the insertion point, which kept track of which slot we're on. So let's imagine that our insertion point is 2. Then, if we decide to spawn in a ruby, then we'll go to slot 2, and that's the precedence that gets assigned to the ruby. After that, the insertion point is incremented by 1, so it now becomes 3. And we can keep doing this. If we then spawn in an emerald, we'll go to slot 3, put the emerald into slot 3, then add 1 to our insertion point. If we then spawn a snake, then we'll go to slot 4, put the snake into slot 4, and add 1 to our insertion point, and so on. But what happens if the insertion point is at 1,000? As it turns out, if we spawn something while our insertion point is at 1,000, then we'll go to slot 1,000 and put that item into slot number 1,000 just as usual. But we only have 1,000 slots available, so when the insertion point is incremented, instead of becoming 1001, it actually just rolls back around and becomes 1 instead. So if we spawn in another item, then that item gets put into slot number 1 instead. So this is what is going on when we perform an insertion switch. This was a fantastic discovery because it meant that we didn't need to rely on good mummy RNG. Here's what we do. We get the insertion point to be a very high number, then kill the mummy. The mummy wrappings will then spawn at a very low precedence. Then, if we perform an insertion switch, any mummy that we spawn after that will spawn with a higher precedence than the mummy wrappings. So the mummy wrappings won't hurt the dupe, even if we don't destroy them. With this new tech discovered, the community then began reconsidering some previously banned exploits. On September 26, 2018, Moss Rankings officially unbanned the hired hand dupe. And so, armed with both the render dupe and the hired hand dupe, score runners were off to the races. On September 28, 2018, Kinnijup beat his previous world record. Then on October 11, 2018. Then again on October 12. Mazerak beat the world record on October 16, 2018, and Kinnijup reclaimed the world record just a day later. Then he beat his world record again on October 26th, then again on October 31st. On November 8th, Mazerak reclaimed the world record, but was beaten by DT just 2 days later, who was then dethroned just 4 days later by Kinnijup. Mazerak reclaimed the world record on November 23rd, but Kinnijup again dethroned him just 4 days later. It will not be an exaggeration to say that the render dupe shook the entire score running scene. After the initial burst wore off, the world record then slowly creeped upwards to the current world record of 7.4 million, achieved by Kinnijup on April 15th of 2019. But what exactly is going on that causes gold and gems to render dupe? This was discovered by Kirby703, Minzy, and Daimono on September 23, 2018, just a bit more than a week after testing started. First, though, we're going to need to talk about for loops. In programming, for loops are a way to tell the computer to do the same thing a certain number of times. To do this, we need to provide the computer with some information. First, how many times should the computer repeat this step? And second, what do you want the computer to do? For instance, you can tell the computer to say, "Mr. Yu, please remove moles 10 times. But you can make the for loops more complex than just that. In fact, you can tell the computer to carry out an entire flowchart. And likewise, you don't need to tell the computer to repeat this step an exact number of times. You can tell the computer to repeat this step for any arbitrary variable, like, say, the number of moles that are in the level, or the number of times that you've died to moles. So this bug is happening in the part of the game that deletes items. You see, whenever you destroy something or pick up something, that item doesn't actually get deleted right away. Instead, the game marks that item for deletion. Then, at a convenient point at the end of each frame, which is 1/60th of a second, the game will simply delete all the marked items at once. This would normally not be a problem. In fact, this is what games usually do. However, in Spelunky HD, the items aren't being deleted correctly, and that's what's causing the dupe to occur. We don't really know what the real code looks like, but based on how the render dupe acts, we can make some approximations. For one, we are reasonably certain that this bug is happening because there's an issue in the for loop of the deletion code. Let's take a look at the for loop of the deletion code. The game tells the computer to run through this flowchart, then repeat this flowchart for the number of items in the level. So what's going on? Let us first imagine an item list of 10 gems. That means that in our imaginary scenario, there will only be 10 gems in the level and nothing else. Then imagine if the player picks them all up. That means all 10 gems are now being marked for deletion. And when the game deletes these gems, you'll start to notice something wrong. When the items are deleted, the number of items in the level are decreasing. So after the game deletes the first gem, the number of items in the level is now 9. So the for loop now thinks, that it's supposed to repeat this flowchart only 9 times in total. And when the game deletes the second gem, the number of items in the level drops again to 8. So now the for loop thinks it's only supposed to repeat this flowchart 8 times in total. And this continues until we only have 5 items remaining. At this point, the game has already repeated this flowchart 5 times in total. The for loop checks how many times it's supposed to repeat the flowchart, and it now sees that it only needs to repeat the flowchart 5 times in total. So the for loop thinks that its job is done and stops deleting items while completely ignoring the 5 remaining items that should have been deleted. Those 5 gems will persist into the next frame, where the player can have the chance to pick them up again for more money. And this can repeat multiple times until there are no gems left to be deleted. And we can see why noise will hurt a dupe. We can go back to our previous example, but this time we'll add in some noise items. For instance, several crates. If we pick up all the gems again but ignore the crates, then we can see that this time 7 gems are deleted before the for loop stops, rather than the 5 gems from last time. As a result, fewer gems are duplicated. And this also explains why players need to follow the order of precedence to get a duplication, because if the player doesn't pick up the most precedent items, then those items will act as noise, and the dupe will be hurt. So now we know what's going on that's causing all of this, but assuming you're still watching, you're probably here to know how you can use the render dupe yourself. So here's how to use the render dupe in a real run. Let's use DT's dupe from the beginning of this video as an example. The first step is to make sure that you don't produce any noise. Particularly troublesome noise items include ropes and used parachutes. That means you should navigate each level without using ropes. Mummy wrappings and leaves can also be problematic if they spawn before you're ready, and lava falls and waterfalls produce a significant amount of noise that is dependent upon the length of the lava fall or waterfall, so it might not be practical to render dupe in a level with tall lava falls or waterfalls. This means that you should not drain a lava pool that has a lava fall, because that will allow the lava fall to introduce more noise. Second, if you have mummies in the level, make sure to set the insertion point to be very high before killing them. You want the mummy wrappings to be inserted at low precedence. Make sure to perform an insertion switch to reset the insertion point after killing the mummies. Third, you should decide which gems and gold can be render duped and which are too difficult to do so. Because the render dupe only works when you pick up multiple items at once, if there's a gem that's by its own, then it may be impractical to dupe that gem. You should pick up those gems before attempting any render dupes, because any gems or gold laying around can itself act as noise. In practice, the only times when gems and gold are close enough together to be easily render duped are in vaults and the City of Gold. So as a rule of thumb, you can pick up any gems and gold that aren't in the City of Gold or aren't nearby vaults. 4th, destroy as many noise items as you can. Stones, arrows, extra shotguns, opened chests, and other items should all be crushed, dropped into lava, or thrown down into the abyss. 5th, align your stack of gems and gold so that you can pick them all up at once. A push block is the easiest way to align a stack of gems and gold on one side, but if your stack only has gems, then you can just jump on the stack from above, because each gem's hitbox has the same height, and you will be able to pick up all the gems at the same time if you land on the stack. In the City of Gold, there is one extra precaution that you should be aware of. The player can only collide with 128 items at once, so it is important to not let your stack of gems and gold exceed 128 items. Otherwise, the extra money that isn't picked up could act as noise and hurt your dupe. As a result, it's recommended to break the City of Gold approximately 1/3 to 1/4 of the level at a time. If everything went well, then you should obtain more money than the expected amount. Congratulations, you've successfully performed a render dupe. And that's everything that you need to know about the render dupe. The Spelunker's guide document on the render dupe goes into more detail on what exactly is going on, so check it out if you have time. The link is in the description. Otherwise, if you have questions or comments, feel free to send a comment down in the comment sections below. Good luck and happy spelunking!